Let me take you on a journey, a sweeping, honest, and deeply human telling of the story of Isaiah, the prophet of salvation and divine judgment, whose words would echo through centuries and whose visions would shape the destiny of a nation. This is a tale set in the heart of Jerusalem almost 2,700 years ago, at a time when empires rose and fell like waves, and when the worship of God, justice, and hope for something greater collided with human frailty, corruption, and fear. Isaiah was not a prophet from the wilderness. He was born in Jerusalem, the beating heart of urban Judah, into a society fraught with division and unease. Some say he might have even been of royal blood, perhaps distantly related to kings, for he had access to palaces and rulers, something few ordinary people could ever imagine. In that world, to be connected wasn't so different than it is today. It gave you a platform, and it put you under a microscope. Isaiah's critics would use both against him. He was a man of strong faith, but also, unmistakably, a man shaped by his upbringing and his times. The road to becoming a prophet was not straight and certainly not easy. The earliest recorded moment that changed everything for Isaiah was his vision, one that would shake him to the core. It happened, according to his own account, in the very year that King Uzziah died, around 742 BC, a death that signified both an ending and a beginning in Judah's history. Imagine the temple in Jerusalem, incense, chanting, the clamor of prayers. Suddenly, for Isaiah, the world split open, and he saw the Lord himself seated upon a throne, so high that even the hem of his robe filled the entire temple. Angels, described with wings and veiled faces, swirled around, calling out, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory." In that moment, Isaiah was not proud or emboldened. He was terrified. He felt every ounce of human guilt and smallness. "Woe is me! I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips." There's something brutally honest in that moment. Isaiah's sensitivity to his own weakness made his acceptance of the divine commission even more haunting and inspiring. He said, "Here am I. Send me." Maybe he meant it with trembling lips, maybe with certainty. But in that moment, he accepted a calling that would mean not fame or adoration, but rejection, ridicule, exhaustion, and heartbreak. For Isaiah's role, unlike what we sometimes assume about prophets, was not simply to comfort. He was to warn his own people of their failings. He was to give voice to God's word, sometimes beautiful words, sometimes words that cut deep and left scars. To understand Isaiah's message, you have to grasp the context. The world was dangerous. The Assyrian Empire, hungry and ruthless, was growing stronger by the year, gobbling up smaller kingdoms. There were factions in Judah. Some believed safety could be found by making deals with Egypt, the old nemesis. Others believed the answer lay with Syria. And then there were those, Isaiah among them, who insisted that alliances with earthly powers would mean nothing if the people turned away from God's justice and mercy. Isaiah navigated court intrigues, catastrophic wars, and the fragile faith of a people unsure of their own future. His message was uncompromising. He thundered against idolatry, the worship of other gods, the appeal to false hopes. But he also condemned injustice. He was as likely to speak about the oppression of the poor, corrupt judges, the arrogance of leaders, as he was to rail against foreign gods. Woe to those who make unjust laws, to those who issue oppressive decrees, to deprive the poor of their rights and withhold justice from the oppressed, he cried. Isaiah refused to let his people off the hook. Being God's chosen was not a free pass. It came with responsibility. Isaiah was married to a woman the texts call the prophetess. They had 2 sons, Shir Jashub, meaning a remnant shall return, and Maher Shalal Hashbaz, quick to the plunder, swift to the spoil. Even his children's names became signposts. their meaning woven into the drama of national survival and hope. Together, their family would become signs and wonders, living reminders of the message Isaiah carried. War exploded in the north as Assyria, under King Shalmaneser and later Sennacherib, unleashed destruction on Israel, Judah's neighbor and cousin. Samaria, the capital, fell. People were led away in chains. Judah trembled but survived, for a time spared by luck or, as Isaiah said, by God's forbearance. But the reprieve was temporary. King Hezekiah of Judah, for all his piety, flirted with rebellion too, and when Assyria came to crush him, Jerusalem was besieged. Hezekiah, battered and afraid, turned to Isaiah. The prophet urged trust in God over foreign alliances, promising deliverance if the king's faith held. It's easy for us today to read these ancient dramas like plays performed by characters we don't quite recognize. But for those in Jerusalem, this was existential. The city could fall, just like Samaria had, at any moment. The people's terror wasn't abstract. It could be seen, tasted, and heard in the silent nights when the Assyrian army camped outside the walls. But Isaiah did not preach despair. He believed in judgment, yes. He never wavered from calling out what was wrong. But he also believed something greater was possible. Central to Isaiah's sermons was hope. He spoke of a future king coming from the line of David, a savior who would establish true peace and justice, who would teach truth and embody the faithfulness Israel was called to. This is the messianic hope that many later saw as pointing to Jesus Christ. Isaiah wrote, "The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned." In this vision, blessings would flow not just to Israel, but to all the nations. One day swords would be beaten into plowshares, and no one would study war anymore. For every harsh word of judgment, Isaiah gave a counterpoint of restoration. This dance between warning and hope is what makes his voice so profoundly enduring. The book of Isaiah is long, sprawling, and layered. The first part, chapters 1 through 39, are dominated by prophecies of doom, descriptions of wars, political plots, and harsh truths. Isaiah warned, if Judah persisted in idolatry and injustice, exile would come, just as it had for Israel. But even in the bleakest predictions, he wove threads of coming salvation, new beginnings, and divine intervention. One of the most powerful episodes in Isaiah's life was when Jerusalem, under siege, teetered on the brink. The Assyrian king sent taunts to Hezekiah, mocking any hope in God's protection. Isaiah told the trembling king to stand firm. They would not be destroyed. And as the stories tell it, a mysterious event decimated the enemy army overnight, leading to a miraculous deliverance of the city. Was it plague, panic, or faith? The people saw the hand of God. But the rest of Isaiah's life wasn't a Hollywood ending. After Hezekiah, Judah would slip back into corruption, and later kings, especially Manasseh, would plunge the nation back into old sins. Some ancient traditions even say Isaiah died a martyr under Manasseh, sawn in two for his uncompromising prophecies. True or not, it captures the relentless way prophets like Isaiah often ended up isolated, misunderstood, or worse. Isaiah's later chapters, 40 through 66, change tone. Here we glimpse comfort, poetry, and visions of healing. "Comfort, comfort my people," he wrote, promising that exile was not the last word, that God still longed to redeem. In those beautiful lines, Isaiah predicts a time when every valley shall be raised up, every mountain and hill made low, making way for God's glory to be revealed to all humanity. One of the most famous passages woven into Christian liturgy and music comes here. "Behold, a virgin will conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel," meaning God with us. Isaiah presented an image of a suffering servant, a figure seen by Christians as pointing to Jesus, who would be pierced for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. Isaiah's words became the foundation for centuries of longing and belief that God would not abandon his people but enter into their suffering. Isaiah's theological vision was immense. He insisted that God's dream for Israel was never meant to be privatized or limited to one tribe. Salvation would radiate outward, encompassing all nations and peoples. The final chapters offer a vision of a restored Jerusalem, where justice reigns, where even foreigners are welcomed, and where peace is more than a wish, it is reality. And yet, Isaiah's realism never left him. He understood that human beings are complicated, that leaders often fail, that societies slip into bad habits, that fear can corrode even the strongest resolve. He saw these patterns in his own people, in himself, and he never sugarcoated the costs of ignoring what matters: justice, humility, faith, and compassion. Why does Isaiah endure? Because his story is not just ancient history, it is a mirror for every age. His struggles between hope and cynicism, faith and pragmatism, judgment and mercy, are not contained to long-ago kings or distant empires. They live in every new crisis, every temptation to trade justice for security, every moment when choosing belief seems harder than settling for what is. Isaiah is not a remote spiritual superhero. He was a human being, racked by doubt, lifted by hope, sometimes fiercely alone, sometimes warmly surrounded by family and a few companions. His willingness to risk ridicule, to speak truth to power, to remind a comfortable society that faith without justice is empty, these things are never out of date. In today's America, we might find in Isaiah's words a stern but uplifting reminder. That religion is not just rituals or identity. It is, at its core, a call to be better than we were yesterday, to never forget the poor and marginalized, to keep faith alive even when events seem hopeless. Isaiah's God is not small. He is the Holy One of Israel, but also the hope of the entire world. If you listen to his message, really listen, it is both unsettling and deeply comforting. No matter how much the world shakes, no matter how many kingdoms rise or fall, no matter how disillusioned we get with leaders, institutions, or even ourselves, God's promise isn't revoked. There will always be a remnant, a way forward. Salvation and judgment are two sides of God's fierce love, and through it all runs the unshakable thread of hope. In closing, to read Isaiah or to listen to his voice across the centuries is to realize that religion is not about blind optimism or cheerleading. It is about being brave enough to face the truth, about God, about history, about ourselves. It's about continually returning to the root of faith and to the call to act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly. Isaiah's story isn't about perfection. It's about journeying through ruin and restoration, through moments of terror and times of peace, holding on to the belief, not always certain, sometimes only hoped for, that God is still writing his story through us. So, whether you're watching from New York or small-town Kansas, whether you find faith easy or impossibly hard, remember Isaiah's story. It spans centuries but speaks personally to every individual willing to listen. He teaches us that there is space for struggle, for questioning, and for wrestling with God, but ultimately, for hope. And that, beyond all the political turbulence, beyond empire and exile, God's compassion and promises remain. And that's a message worth hearing, again and again in any age.